Hey watercolor wizards, Hajra here. Today we'll be working on a Persian phoenix in white ink on black paper. Thanks for parking your brushes here and let the epic painting adventures begin. Art blogs, Q&As, sketches, deconstructed paintings, video notes, and art gifts are all at a single convenient tier for patrons on Patreon. I just did my drawing on white drawing paper and then I colored on the back using white pastel pencil, and then after that was done I taped down and traced over my own drawing to transfer it onto the black paper, and you end up getting a pretty good impression with the white pastel, and because it's erasable you can also fix stuff if you wanted. So the paper I'm using is called My Tints Pastel. It's from Canson. First of all, I'm going to use a gel pen and you can see it shows up really nice and opaque. And then I'm also going to show white pastel pencil, which is what I scribbled on the back of the drawing to transfer, and you can see that that smudges and isn't permanent. And I'm also using my white Inktense pencil and my white Albrecht Dürer watercolor pencil. The white gel pen is definitely the most opaque, but I think if you go over those pencils in layers, they can become more opaque. But for this project, I decided to go with the white gel pen because I just wanted something that was immediately opaque in a single stroke because this is a simpler piece. But what I found out many years ago was that if you wet the gel pen as soon as you put it down, then like the watercolor pencil and Inktense pencil, you can also sort of blend out the gel pen. But it has to be wet right when you put it down. At least for the gel pen that I have, which is Jelly Roll by Sakura, you do have to wet it immediately, otherwise it becomes waterproof. So I'm going to do a combination of wet on dry and wet and wet blending for this phoenix. This is just a lot of fun to see that white pop, so I started out with some wet on dry for these tinier areas. So I put on the gel pen, and while it was still wet, I blended out an edge where there is a brighter white and then it fades to a more clear white, and then I can have sort of like a smoky white that fades into the black. So it gives a very cool value contrast. And in these tighter areas, of course, I do want to use wet on dry because otherwise I'll lose control. So I'm going to be reserving the wet and wet effects for like the feathers and stuff, and that'll make them really easy and spontaneous and beautiful, but it will give me more control in these smaller areas to do wet on dry instead. And one of the things I noticed with the white gel pen is that it really does work like white liquid ink. So if you have used the Dr. P.H. Martin's Bombay ink in white, it's going to look very much the same on the paper and act very much the same. And just like that ink, this is waterproof once it dries, but it is temporarily, just as it's wet, movable and blendable into a gradient. This is a Persian phoenix, but unlike the colorful manuscript phoenixes, he's only one color, because I really liked how it pops with just the white on the black, and then it makes it look like the phoenix is made out of white flame or stars like flame or just stars, and it's just a really cool look to make it look like he's like a starry phoenix hanging out in a black night sky. And doing it with a gel pen is definitely faster than it would be if I was working with the white liquid ink in a bottle, and it also is more controlled because, you know, you have a very fixed deposit of ink coming out of the pen. And as I get to the later feathers, you'll see me put down clear water and then put in the ink. And that makes the ink have a bleeding edge and it gives it a soft edge, spontaneous, stylized flame look that is perfect for this piece. It does a lot of the effect wonderfully on its own, and sometimes I just leave it, but other times I go and tap the edge of the wet ink with my brush further to make it settle in a particular way. You can add little dots and dabs to make it look like the little star flames are fading out, and again it makes it look more like it's fading into constellations, fitting with the star theme. You can make a larger area seem just a bit more blended, you know, just some clean water on the brush down on the paper first. And don't use a huge amount of water because you don't want it to be completely out of control, and you also don't want this paper to get totally messed up. This is pastel paper and it's thicker, but it's not made for watercoloring. It doesn't have gelatin sizing in it, so you're only going to be able to use a limited amount of water on it. If you want to do a limited water gouache piece, you can do it on this black paper, as I've said in my watercolor supplies video in the past. And I really like the wet pointillism effect of putting those dots into the wings. And I've shown that before with watercolor pencils, where you can have wet paper and then stipple some dots into the wet area and it gives you bleeding dots, and that's what I'm doing here, except for I'm doing it with a gel pen. And I have a black Zig Rider marker out, and I've only used the black marker in a few teeny tiny touch-up places. In a few places you might want a cleaner line in black, or the white goes where you don't want it, and then you can use that black marker to touch it up. It's really great having the opposite of white paper where you can erase back to the white. This is black paper, so you can erase back to the black with a black marker. So just working with it on white is actually really fun and sort of endlessly correctable if you need it. I did find that most of the effects were just how I wanted them, so I didn't use as much black. I only used a few tiny touches of black marker here and there, but feel free to use it as much or as little as you want depending on the effects you want or if the white goes places that you don't want it. For the larger feathers I use wet and wet, and for the smaller ones I use more wet on dry. So I would suggest that you do your drawing on a separate piece of white drawing paper like I did. It makes it a lot easier to see what you're sketching because we're just not used to sketching with graphite on black paper. And you can see the graphite at sort of an angle when you're sketching on black paper. You could also sketch on the black paper with white pastel pencil and erase using like a kneaded eraser or a factus eraser for black paper, so that's also an option. So with the neck area, I did some white stippling and then I did some black stippling on top of that, and it really gives a lovely sort of Swiss cheese star effect where, you know, you see some of the white and the black together as dots, so it's a lovely way to create that kind of textural effect. For the bottom tail feathers, I did a fuzzy outward feather silhouette and then blended towards the center with a wet brush with some water in it, and you have to do it pretty fast because if the white ink dries, then you can't really blend more towards the center. It sort of stays where it wants to, so it's really dependent on whether or not you get to that white ink before it dries, so that part of it is important. You can have beautiful birds and they'll still have these really knobby knuckles and bony claw and talon area, so. And very obviously this is a stylized bird. This is not a realistic bird. It's also such a great refresher course on how stylized things can be so attractive. Very decorative. The best art combines rendering with decoration, so it's nice to skew more towards decoration in some pieces so you can study that, and then in other pieces you can skew more towards realism so you can study that and then find where you are in the middle. So if you check out my Patreon, I've included a finished phoenix drawing and also a partially done phoenix base drawing that includes just the head, neck, body, and talons, but you can do all of the embellishments and tail feathers and wings and head feathers yourself. So it's totally up to you if you want to use my drawing entirely or if you want to sort of make a hybrid with a lot of original elements. And the drawing I did was inspired by an old manuscript image, but you can also change the pose however you want if you want to draw it from scratch. So you can check out the partial drawing that teaches you how to make your own phoenix, or the finished drawing if you just want to use my phoenix on Patreon, with the white on top of the black and then some black on top of that white for the rest of that neck because it seems like an open area. And if it looks too busy to you, just cover it all up in black and it'll go away. It'll go right away into the paper, so you just have to have a nice black permanent marker and it'll just cover it up. I saw somebody in San Francisco at the Asian Art Museum cafeteria, I think, and they had a lovely phoenix tattoo, and I had to point it out to Elijah because I was like, hey, look at this phoenix tattoo, because it totally looked like a Persian phoenix. So I didn't have the time to ask because, you know, there's other people in line, but I wanted to ask him if it was a Persian phoenix because it looked like a Persian phoenix. The Persian word for this phoenix is Simurgh, which means 30 birds, implying that the phoenix is as big as at least 30 average birds. There's also another giant bird called the Rock, which is not Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, but a giant, large, fantastical bird that was supposedly large enough to carry away an elephant. Various stories in the Arabian Nights. There's a lovely old illustration where even a hatching rock chick dwarfs humans from the golden age of illustration. So my focus for the painting I'm doing in this video is the smaller and more stylized Simurgh or Persian phoenix, and you can do yours in a white or metallic paint on black paper like I did, or you can make it colorful like the Persians did in old manuscripts, whatever you like. I came back to get the main center vein of those feathers with a line of black, and so that's just another way where you can see how you're combining the black and how that works over the white, which is working over the black paper. I mean, you can make this as complicated as you want. This could get super complicated because really you can do so much stuff with it. Or you can just do it for something that's a little bit more simple and fun and stylized like this. So the tail feathers is where I felt like I was waiting to have the most fun, because just like the little flamey star feathers on the neck and on the head, you go ahead and put the water in, and then you start dabbing in the ink strongest at the very furthermost outer edges of the feathers, and then towards the center you just blend that a little bit, and it gives you this lovely gradient. Most of it is a spontaneous bleed, and some of it is a sort of scooted over shepherded bleed. So it's just letting the ink do its thing because it's wet on top of water, and then giving a little bit of help where I want it to go someplace else. What I've done with my feathers is I've made the very outside tips the whitest, and it's fading towards a lighter white and a darker black in the center. But you could do it the opposite and see what that looks like. You could definitely make it fade to a black on the outside, but it will make it fade into the paper, so it will make the feathers look thinner, and like there's less there unless you make them even thicker than this, so less easy to read and see where the bird feathers are starting and stopping. So it's a good idea to have a lot of the outside outline portions of the bird in some kind of white and not any kind of pure black, and leave more of sort of the inside areas like the neck area or the inside of a wing or the inside of a feather in the black, or some shade of gray that has more black in it. Because on the inside, there's no confusion. You know it's inside the bird, so you know it's separate from the paper. And there's something really hypnotic and relaxing about doing something that is fun and bleeding in water and repetitious. I really think there has to be some kind of brain, meditation, universe, beauty connection here. I've done this so many times where I've painted something and then just lost myself in it and felt so much more at peace and so much closer to God and the universe as a result of just relaxing and painting. And I'm usually such a wired and high energy and just wound up, stressed out person. So I think art is really, really lovely therapy. It's like your mind and your hands and what your eyes see can all agree on this seen but not spoken language that you don't know how to communicate, that you can't communicate in words. And maybe that's why they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, is because what you're communicating here to your heart, to your mind, to your feelings, and to anybody else who sees it is much more than you could do with words. And maybe that's why it feels so fulfilling when you make it, because it's an unspoken yet universally understood language. And I'm going to keep doing more of the same for the rest of these feathers. I'm going to put down some water. I'm going to add the white ink on top of that near the corners, and let it blend to some spontaneous effects and some semi-controlled effect. And I hope you go and try your own Persian phoenix, whether you do it in white or gold or silver on black paper, or whether you decide to go full color on white paper. Well, Wizards, hope you enjoyed doing this magical phoenix painting with me. Here's the one I did from last year, and here's the one that I'm finishing now. Please like, comment, subscribe, and check out my website, links, and Patreon page to support my art and art channel below. Thanks for parking your brushes here, and wishing you all fantastical painting adventures.